Yay! Wednesday, November 5th, regular class. We're going to take a look at finish out the rest of our story called The Necklace, which I know didn't seem all that exciting from the beginning yesterday, but judging from third period's reactions today, it ends well. And it's an overall fun story as we get into it. They start third period, who's mute and just sits there and stares at me, actually started like yelling and talking and getting all into the story, and I got a little scared. I felt like learning was happening. Like, that's not supposed to happen. Once again, up here, we have the usual shoe drive for B points. You can bring them in. How many pairs can you bring in?
5.
How many points do you get per pair?
3.
For a total of how many?
15.
Skills. And then the book report book, bring that. If you have it, show it to me today. If not, you can bring it tomorrow. We can do it from there. Oh, go on.
Can I read?
Today, we'll see. Cause I might try and read because I want to get through it. 'Cause with all of our lots of missing homework assignments, it's sort of slowed us down, and so we're behind where I'd like to be. So I might end up reading today, and eventually we're going to come back to you guys being able to read. Makes me feel sad. I like having you guys read, but I also don't want to give you homework. So my not wanting to give you homework kind of wins out. Mumble, what?
But you said that we have to read this for homework.
Correct. So I was trying to give you as little homework as possible. I want to give you something else on top of that.
Oh.
I figured that story is pretty short, and it's a pretty cool story about this kid at school. So I didn't want to add more to it. From yesterday, we introduced one character yesterday, and that's pretty much all we got into. Who was our one character yesterday? Jake? Matilda. And what is our opinion of Matilda so far? Blue?
She's a brat.
She's a brat. And why do we say she's a brat?
Because she's ungrateful for what she has. She doesn't really care about anybody else.
Works for me. Is she attractive or ugly?
Attractive.
On the outside, she's attractive, but on the inside, she's a little on the hideous side. Because it said she was like the only beautiful person born into an ugly family. And then she is upset about, she says that she has no money and she's poor. But realize it's her idea of being poor. Because she talked about the fact that she has a servant in her house. I don't have a servant, and I didn't think I was poor, but apparently I don't have a servant. So apparently I'm fairly poor. Because if you don't have a servant, it says something about it. So apparently her idea of poor is different than our idea of poor. And so she doesn't have as rich as her other richy rich friends. So we're on the right-hand side of the second column, about partway down, where we're talking about her and her brattiness, where it says one evening. Her husband's going to try and be nice to her. One evening, her husband came home with an excited air, holding a large envelope in his hand. "Here's something for you," he said. Swiftly, she tore the paper and drew out a printed card on which were these words: "The Minister of Education and Mrs. Rampone request the pleasure of the company of Mr. and Mrs. Loisel at the ministry on the evening of Monday, January the 18th. Instead of being delighted, as her husband hoped, she flung the invitation angrily across the table, murmuring, "What do you want me to do with this?" "Why, darling, I thought you'd be pleased. You never go out, and this is a great occasion. I went through tremendous trouble to get it." "Everyone wants one. It's very rare, and very few go to the clerks. You'll see all the really important people there." She looked at him out of furious eyes and said impatiently, "And what do you suppose I'm to wear at such an affair?" He never thought about it, he stammered. "Why, the dress you go to the theater in. It looks very nice to me." He stopped, stupefied, utterly at a loss when he saw that his wife was beginning to cry. 2 large tears ran slowly down from the corners of her eyes toward the corners of her mouth. "What's the matter with you?" he faltered. With a violent effort, she overcame her grief and replied in a calm voice, wiping her wet cheeks, "Nothing, only I have a dress, so I can't go to this party. Give your invitation to some friend of yours whose wife will turn out better than I shall." Pausing for a moment. Her husband tries to do something nice to her. What nice thing does he do?
Get her invited to a party.
Gets her an invitation to a big fancy party. How does she react to this invitation to a big fancy party?
She doesn't like it.
She's upset and bursts into tears. What every husband wants when you bring your wife a gift. Angry tears. And why is she upset? What horrible thing has happened?
Because she doesn't have a dress to wear.
No dress. And she's like, "How dare you make me go to this fancy party when I have no dress to wear?" So is this different than her personality has been so far?
Yes.
No.
No.
Is she being a brat still?
Yes.
I was just curious.
Now she's a dramatic brat.
I think that goes along with being a brat. I think most of them are probably over dramatic, but yes, there's definitely a little bit of drama. What? Girls bring drama? No. He was heartbroken. Look here, Matilda, he persisted. What would be the cost of a suitable dress, which you could use on other occasions as well? Something very simple. She thought for several seconds, reckoning up prices and also wondering for how large a sum she could ask without bringing upon herself an immediate refusal and an exclamation of horror from the careful-minded clerk. At last, she replied with some hesitation, I don't know exactly, but I think I could do it on $400? He grew slightly pale, for this was exactly the amount he'd been saving for a new gun, intending to do a little hunting next summer in the neighboring woods with some friends who went deer hunting there on Sundays. Nevertheless, he said, very well, I'll give you $400. But try and get a really nice dress with the money. So, does she get her dress? Where and how much does she need? 400. And her husband had that money, and why did he have the money originally?
So you buy another gun.
That he's going to regret not buying that gun. And so instead he gives it to her so that she can buy a dress, which is much more important than firearms. The day of the party drew near, and Mrs. Loisel seemed sad, uneasy, anxious. Her dress was ready, however. One evening her husband said to her, What's the matter with you? You seem very odd for the last 3 days. I'm utterly miserable at not having any jewels, not a single stone to wear, she replied. I shall look like absolutely no one. I would rather almost not go to the party. Wear flowers, he said. They're very attractive at this time of the year. For $10, you can get 2 or 3 gorgeous roses. She was not convinced. No, there's nothing so humiliating as looking poor in the middle of a lot of rich women. How stupid you are, exclaimed her husband. Go and see Mrs. Forestier and ask her to lend you some jewels. You know her quite well enough for that. She uttered a cry of delight. That's true. I never thought of it. And the next day she went to see her friend and told her her trouble. Again, we have problems. We have our dress. Everything's lovely. But now we have more drama. And what is our newest drama? No jewels. And her husband does come up with an idea. And what is his stupid idea?
Go to a friend and call.
Well, before that one, that's the good idea. Yes.
Oh, flowers.
The flower. He's like, flowers. He's like, what am I, a hobo? She's like, I'm not going to wear flowers. And so basically she sasses him. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I would never. And so then he comes up with this other idea. And what's the other idea?
Borrow.
Yeah, he's like, borrow from your rich friend. He's like, oh yeah, that would probably work. So that's a good idea. Wait, do you guys know what karma is?
Yes.
What's karma?
Basically bad luck.
Close. Not just bad luck, but you're on the right track. Brendan?
Kind of can be the luck that you get when you are being spoiled.
And then how about good luck?
I don't know.
Oh, you're close to it. You're very close to it. Jake?
So like when you do something good, you get something in return, and then when you do something bad, you get something.
Nicely done. The idea of karma is when you lead a good life and do good things happen to you. When you lead a bad life and do bad things happen to you. It's the idea of karma. Keep that in mind. The next day, she went to see her friend and told her her trouble. Mrs. Forestier went to her dressing table, took up a large box, and brought it to Mrs. Loisel. Opened it and said, Choose, my dear. First, she saw some bracelets, then a pearl necklace, then a Venetian cross in gold and gems, this big fancy cross, of exquisite workmanship. She tried the effect of the jewels before the mirror, hesitating, unable to make up her mind to leave them, to give them up. She kept on asking, Haven't you anything else? Yes, look for yourself. I don't know what you would like best. Suddenly, she discovered in a black satin case a superb diamond necklace. Her heart began to beat covetously, which is the same as covet. Remember what covet means?
Mm-hmm.
From Annabelle Lee, that's how the angels felt. What does covet mean?
Yes.
Nicely done. Began to beat covetously. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. She fastened it around her neck, upon her high dress, and stared in shocked wonder at the beautiful sight of herself. Then, with hesitation, she asked in anguish, Could you lend me this? Just this alone? Yes, of course. She flung herself around her friend, embraced her crazily, and went away with her treasure. The day of the party arrived. Mrs. Loisel was a success. She was the prettiest woman present, elegant, graceful, smiling, quite above herself with happiness. All the men stared at her, asked her name, wanted to be introduced to her. All the rich young bachelors were eager to waltz with her. Even the minister himself noticed her. She danced madly, enthusiastically, drunk with pleasure, with no thought for anything, in the triumph of her beauty, in the pride of her success, in a cloud of happiness made up of this universal worship and admiration, of the desires she had aroused, of the completeness of a victory so dear to her female heart. She left about 4 o'clock in the morning. Since midnight, her husband had been dozing in a deserted little room, in company with 3 other men whose wives were having a good time. He threw over her shoulders the jackets he had brought for them to go home in, modest, everyday clothes whose poverty clashed with the beauty of the ball dress. She was aware of this and was anxious to hurry away so that she could not be noticed by the other women putting on their costly furs. By the way, did the party go well?
Yes.
Did people like her?
Yes.
Was she beautiful?
Yes.
Was the dress awesome?
Yes.
Everything she could dream of. So, bad person? Did bad things happen to her?
No.
No.
Yet.
Good things happened to her. She was a spoiled brat, and she got to have the time of her life. Mr. Brovicast, that's the opposite of Carmen. I know, I tricked you. I'm sorry. Mr. Loisel restrained her. Wait a little. You'll catch cold in the open. I'm going to go fetch a cab. But she didn't listen to him, and rapidly descended the staircase. When they were out in the street, they could not find a cab. They began to look for one, shouting at the drivers whom they saw passing in the distance. They walked down towards the river, desolate and shivering. At last, they found on the main avenue one of those old night prowling taxis, which is only to be seen in cities after dark, as though they were ashamed of their shabbiness in the daylight. It brought them to their door on Martyr Road, and sadly they walked up to their own apartment. It was the end for her. As for him, he was thinking that he had to be at the office at 10 in the morning. What time did they leave the party? 4. She took off the garments in which she wrapped her shoulders so as to see herself in all of her glory before the mirror. But suddenly, she uttered a cry. The necklace was no longer around her neck. "What's the matter with you?" asked her husband, already half undressed. She turned towards him in utter distress. I've no longer got Mrs. Forcier's necklace." He stared in astonishment. "What? Impossible!" They searched in the folds of her dress, in the folds of the coat, in the pockets, everywhere, and could not find it. "Are you sure that you still had it on when you came away from the ball?" "Yes, I tossed it in the hall of the ministry." "But if you lost it in the street, we should have heard it fall." "Yes, well, probably we should. Did you take the number of the cab?" "No." "Well, you didn't notice it, did you?" "No." They stared at one another, dumbfounded. At last, Mr. Loisel put on his clothes again. "I'll go over all the ground we walked and see if I can't find it." And he went out. She remained in her evening clothes, lacking strength to get into bed, huddled on a chair, without the ability or power of thought. Her husband returned about 7 in the morning. He had found nothing. He went to the police station, to the newspapers to offer a reward, to the cab companies, everywhere that a ray of hope sent him. She waited all day long, in the same state of bewilderment at this fearful catastrophe. Mr. Loisel came home at night, his face lined and pale. He had discovered nothing. "You must write to your friend," he said, "and tell her that you've broken the clasp of her necklace and are getting it mended. That will give us time to look about us." She wrote as he came up with the right words. Oh, Karma. What happened with our Karma now?
She lost a necklace.
Do they know where?
No.
No. Yeah?
What does astonishment mean?
You know what astonishment means?
Yes.
What's astonishment?
I'm new.
Yeah, it was like, what? Ah! And so astonished is the shock. awe, amazement kind of thing. When it says that they're going to have to come up with an excuse that they've broken the clasp, you guys know what a clasp is?
Isn't it the thing like connected to?
Yeah, the little hooky parts that go together. So they're saying that they're coming up with this. They're saying, hey, we broke the clasp. It's a little excuse we've come up with. So they're going to try and buy some time before they have to return it. Because anytime you make a poor choice, what should she do? What is she choosing to do? Lies. Always bury your mistake in lies. Nothing bad will happen from that. Always remember that as a teenager. The more mistakes you make, bury more lies on top of it, and things only get better.
Hey, we're humans, we make mistakes.
Oh, let's see how deep she buries herself. By the end of a week, they had lost all hope. Mr. Loisel, who had aged 5 years in that week, declared, "We must see about replacing the diamonds." Next day, they took the box which had held the necklace and went to the jeweler's whose name was inside. He consulted his books. It was not I who sold the necklace, ma'am. I must have merely supplied the clasp. Then they went from jeweler to jeweler, searching for another necklace like the first, consulting their memories, both ill with remorse and anguish of mind. In a shop at the upscale mall, they found a string of diamonds, which seemed to them exactly like the one they were looking for. It was worth $40,000. They were allowed to have it for $36,000. They begged the jeweler not to sell it for 3 days, and they arranged matters on the understanding that it would be taken back for $34,000 if the first one were found before the end of February. You remember what month the party was? January. Mr. Loisel possessed $18,000 left to him by his father. He intended to borrow the rest. He did borrow it, getting $1,000 from one man, $500 from another, $5 here, $3 there. He gave promissory notes, entered into horrible agreements, did business with loan sharks, the whole tribe of evil moneylenders. He mortgaged the whole remaining years of his existence, risked his signature without even knowing if he could honor it, and, appalled at the agonizing face of the future, at the black misery about to fall upon him, at the prospect of every possible physical attack and moral torture, he went to get the new necklace and put down upon the jeweler's counter $36,000. When Mrs. Loisel took back the necklace to Mrs. Forestier, the latter said to her in a chilly voice, "You ought to have brought it back sooner. I might have needed it." She did not, as her friend had feared, open the case. If she had noticed the substitution, what would she have thought? What would she have said? Would she have not taken her for a thief? Mrs. Loisel came to know the horrible life of being absolutely poor. From the very first, she played her part heroically. This fearful debt must be paid off. She would pay it. The servant was dismissed. They moved to a smaller apartment. They even rented a room in their small home to a local man to use. She came to know the heavy work of the house, the hateful duties of the kitchen. She washed the plates, wearing out her pink nails on the coarse pottery and the bottoms of pans. She washed the dirty linen, the shirts and dishcloths, and hung them out to dry on a string. Every morning she took the dustbin down into the street and carried up the water, stopping on each landing to get her breath. And, clad like a poor woman, she went to the fruit market, to the grocer, to the butcher, a basket on her arm, haggling, insulted, and fighting for every wretched penny of her money. Every month, bills had to be paid off, others renewed, time gained. Her husband worked in the evenings at putting straight a merchant's accounts, and often at night he did copying at 50 cents a page. And this lasted 10 full years. At the end of 10 years, everything was paid off. Everything. The loan shark's charges, the accumulation of superimposed interest on the money borrowed. Mrs. Loisel looked old now. She'd become like all the other strong, hard, coarse women of poor households. Her hair was badly done. Her skirts were awry. Her hands were red. She spoke in a shrill voice, and the water slopped all over the floor when she scrubbed it. But sometimes, when her husband was at the office, she sat down by the window and thought of that evening long ago, of the ball at which she'd been so beautiful and so much admired. What would have happened if she had never lost those jewels? Who knows? How strange life is, how fickle, how little is needed to ruin or to save. One Sunday, as she had gone for a walk along the riverbank to freshen herself after the labors of the week, she caught sight suddenly of a woman who was taking a child out for a walk. It was Mrs. Forestier, still young, still beautiful, still attractive. Mrs. Loisel was conscious of some emotion. Should she speak to her? Yeah, certainly. And now that she had paid, she would tell her everything. Why not? She went up to her and said, "Good morning, Jean." The other did not recognize her and was surprised at being thus familiarly addressed by a poor woman. "But, ma'am," she stammered, I don't know you. You must be making a mistake." "No, I'm Matilda Loisel." Her friend uttered a cry. "Oh, my poor Matilda, how you've changed." "Yes, I've had some hard times since I saw you last, and many sorrows, and all because of you." "Because of me? How's that?" "You remember the diamond necklace you lent me for the ball at the ministry?" "Yes, well?" "Well, I lost it." "How could you? Well, why, you brought it back." "I brought you another one just like it, and for the last 10 years, we've been paying for it. You realize it wasn't easy for us. We had no money. Well, it's paid for at last, and I'm glad indeed." Mrs. Forestier had halted. "You say you bought the diamond necklace to replace mine?" "Yes. You hadn't noticed it? They were very much alike." And she smiled in proud and innocent happiness. Mrs. Forestier, deeply moved, took her two hands. "Oh, my poor Matilda. Mine was fake. It was worth at the very most $500.
I have a few words I understand.
Okay. Yes, dear.
Glad.
Clad, dressed in.
Okay, and what else?
She never. No, what she should have done.
R-A-Y, or A-W-R-Y.
A ride, all in different directions. They all messed up.
Okay, and then
Mr. Brovicast, that's
S-H-R-I-L-O.
Shrill.
Yeah.
That's why I was talking like this.
Oh,
That's a
okay.
shrill voice.
And then fickle.
Fickle. Fickle is when you are
Fickle.
very choosy, if you will. I just want to win or whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Okay. Grant,
Why'd you choose this?
why did I choose this story?
Continue
Well-
us not to be brats.
It's
Yes.
insane. It was a fake.
I know.
Shouldn't they get all the money back in the necklace?
Probably. I imagine now that there's every chance that she would be able to then take the necklace back from Madame Forestier and be like, "Hey, can we get the necklace back?"
Actually, it is kind of karma.
I mean, oh, it is karma. How so?
Because at the beginning she said, but I didn't have a dress even though she did.
Uh-huh.
So she could have wore that, and he could have had his $500.
$400.
$400. And so it wouldn't be that hard of a challenge if it was just fake. And they could have just gone to her and say that we've lost it.
Definitely. Nice little karma slap on this one, because is she a good person?
No.
No. And do bad things happen?
Yes.
And not just a little bad thing, but how many years of her life did she give up? 10 years of her life paying this thing off that she didn't have to pay off after all. If only she'd made good choices. And of course, her choice to cover it in lies, did that work out well for her? No, it did. And so I like this one because of the idea that, and then of course, it's the joy, there's a little bit of irony in the whole thing, the fact that she does all this work, and the fact that when she returns the necklace to her friend, she's really happy that her friend didn't look inside the box. Why is she happy that her friend didn't look inside the box?
So she would know it wasn't a...
She's like, because she might have realized it was a different necklace. Oh, my life would have been ruined. Irony! It wouldn't have been ruined. It would have saved her life. And so then she goes the whole idea. And she's worried that her friend is going to think she's a thief. You're not a thief if you replace it with something more expensive. irony again. And so it's like all the joy's going into it. Steven!
My reaction to the ending was like,
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought too with the whole thing. Tomorrow, we're going to run through the 7 elements of the story with you, and we're going to see how well you can figure it out as our trade. Of the necklace. The one that has the fun they had, it's kind of, doesn't have as much of a shocking ending as this one does, but it's a fun story with what it deals with, and we'll talk about that one too. Other than that, if you have a book report book to show me, bring it. If